Welcome to Groundbreakers. I am your host, Nick Stilo, and my co-host, Joe Villar.
Welcome back, everyone.
We're in the room here with our producer, Stefano, and our videographer, Keisha, and
right.
Joe and myself. We've taken the summer off. It's been a good summer.
It's been a good summer.
And we're back, and it's sweater weather.
Do you like sweater weather?
I love sweater weather.
Not so much.
I like summer.
I like summer.
Okay. And you like
For
the
me,
sweater weather.
I
For
like
me,
the
fall
fall
is the preemptive strike to winter.
Exactly.
That's what fall
Winter
is to me.
is coming.
Things are dying.
Okay, what's new in the news of Toronto condos? Read this one article from the Urbaneer, Toronto's stalled condo market and its impact on housing supply. We have dropped condo sales significantly, 19.8% year over year, while inventory is rising.
Yeah.
That's a big problem.
There's a huge supply right now of condos, specifically smaller condos. Typically the one bedroom plus den are in great supply right now, which is pretty much driving those prices downward and making developers hold back on new construction for the time being. I think the reason for that is these type of condos, the small one bedroom plus den condos, were typically for investors. Your mom and pop type investor who is getting into the market.
And some sophisticated investors as well. You know, it was a good product, 400 square feet, $1,000 a foot, $400,000. Okay, it didn't come with parking, but you know, you got yourself a unit in the big city. Now, when the investors are trying to offload these, they're realizing that other investors aren't going to buy them because it's a 400 square foot unit and no other investor wants to buy it right now. And when they're trying to sell it to end users are saying, well, I don't want to buy a 400 square foot condo. I'll live in it if I'm renting it because it's not mine and I can move out at any time, but I'm not going to buy a 400 square foot condo because it doesn't work. This room is 400 square feet.
But why?
Okay, maybe smaller than 400
Why
square
are
feet,
investors?
But still, I mean,
why are investors downloading? Why are investors selling?
Why?
What's the reason behind it?
over
In
leveraged.
in my opinion,
They're over leveraged.
In my opinion, at the time, even though a lot of these units were cash flow negative, which means that the rent they were bringing in was less than
They were losing every month.
the amount to carry that unit, they were still willing to invest because they saw appreciation in that unit. So that appreciation and the value of that appreciation was exceeding whatever debt they were carrying for that unit.
Right.
Now they're not seeing that. Now they're seeing the opposite. So not only are they cash flow negative, but they're also, their value is depreciating.
That's bad.
So what they're doing is they're pulling out of that and they want their invested money in other markets where they are going to get a decent rate of return.
So where is that market? What market are you speaking of?
tertiary markets, secondary markets, Niagara Falls, Hamilton,
Outside the GTA.
Peterborough, you know, Whitby, Milton.
or other growing economies
Yeah.
that are outside of real estate.
Well, you mentioned Whitby. What is the difference with Whitby and the Greater Toronto area? Because you said people will invest more further out.
The prices of construction is cheaper out there. The labor rates are cheaper. The union rates are cheaper. So the cost of construction is cheaper, which means it can sell it cheaper. DCs are cheaper
Okay.
compared to Toronto, so you can sell it cheaper.
But also the investors, they're also getting incentives. They are getting now a locker, sometimes even 2 parking spaces.
Which is a huge bonus.
However, you're still stuck with the 400 square foot, 1 bedroom, 1 kitchen, 1 bath.
Yeah.
So what is going to happen with all of these unusable condo spaces?
Well, let me just speak to that investor unit, that 400 square foot unit. That's very much a Toronto thing, a big city thing. The tertiary markets and the secondary markets aren't seeing that kind of condo. They're seeing some of it, but not the majority of the building being built with these investor-sized, you know, tiny units. So, you know, an investor unit in Whitby would be 550 square feet versus 400. 150 square feet is a lot of square footage to be spread out across an apartment. An extra parking spot is huge. That, on average, is $80,000 cost in the city of Toronto
$80,000.
for a parking space.
Wow.
Average. Well, the cost of that parking space is $60,000 plus.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but is it worth? So it goes back to my initial question. You made a comment that now investors they're cash flow negative, and they're depreciating their unit. So these units are built. What's going to happen now? What are we going to do with these spaces?
It'll come down to price point.
They'll have to keep dropping until they
It'll
can
have to
sell
come
it.
down to a point where people feel that there's value there in that price based on that square footage.
But doesn't this ruin the new builds that are to come? Because now people are saying, well, why am I going to go and spend $750,000
Yeah.
on a new build that's
Yeah.
going to be built
Yeah.
when I can just get this resale that they're trying to offload for $400,000?
It comes down to demand and supply. Right now, there's a big supply, which is driving the prices down. Eventually, that's going to turn around. Eventually, there won't be supply. There'll still be demand, which will drive the prices the other way.
What
So-
needs to happen to get this switch going?
Several factors.
Tell me.
Cost of construction needs to come down. In particular, labor rates, in my opinion. Material prices have come down, they're at least stabilized. We're not getting the same price increase that we did just after COVID. So prices in materials have stabilized. I think, in my opinion, labor costs are still high. Development charges is still a very big factor. It's one of the highest cost items on my pro forma, are development charges. That needs to be revisited. Interest rates help, but they're not the end all and be all. There's many other factors that need to come into play to move things around again.
So once the trades have come to terms with the fact that work is now scarce, they have to reduce their prices. Does this allow you now to look at your spreadsheet and say, now we can start to negotiate on building more because the trades cost is coming down because they need work because there's no work that can be get? Is that, would you say that that's a fair assumption, Nick?
Yeah, I'd say it's fair.
It's only one factor, though. Like I said, there's
One of
several.
many.
There's many factors, right? Like as I mentioned before, development charges, interest rates, material labor costs, and the overall perception of the market. In my opinion, investors aren't going to invest if they foresee or have the perception that values are going to continue to fall. They're not going to jump in. Once that perception changes and investors feel that their value of their investment is going to grow, that will also help stimulate the market.
Look, we've had a couple rate drops already, and that's stimulated at least a little bit of confidence in the consumer, but not enough to bring them out and start writing checks.
If you're in a floating rate environment, I tend to agree. Most people aren't. Most people are in a fixed rate environment. So price reduction in interest rates really doesn't affect them in the short term. In the long term, it will. But in the short term, there's not a whole lot of change there. I think if we continue down this path of interest rate reduction, that will definitely provide additional comfort and stability in the market. And we'll see where it goes.
So now I have to ask, and I have to address the fact that you guys are in the rental space business. You build spaces to rent, not to buy, correct?
To sell.
To
No,
sell.
we don't sell. We build and keep it.
Correct. Does this mean now that as the market shifts more into a renter society, is that kind of where your market is going to start to increase? Because people are not going towards the let me buy the property because there's no reason to invest in a property because I'm losing money. So now are people looking more to forget it? I don't want to put my money there. I want to rent. Do you guys see that progressing in 2025, 2026?
So you're asking a couple questions here. You're asking a question from the developer standpoint, if that's going to stimulate more developers to build purpose-built
Yes.
housing, and then you've also asked if that's going to stimulate the renters to abandon the idea of home ownership
Yes.
and rent. So I'll dissect both of those.
Sure.
On the developer side, there are some great programs which we've been very vocal about in the past, from CMHC Canada, Mortgage Housing Corporation, i.e. MLI Select, and ACLP, which are both fantastic programs for developers to take advantage of some government incentives of high loan to costs, long terms of repayment, longer amortization terms, and lower interest rates, which are all great incentives to help the numbers work out on the pro forma, which will incentivize developers to build more rental housing. But there's a flip side to that. A lot of developers are not completely self-funded, meaning a lot of developers have land partners, institutional investors, family investors, capital that's come from different mortgages on these loans that perhaps not all those additional players want to be in this long game of build and hold. So it's not as easy as a sell when you have to go back to a board of directors or to a committee and say, hey guys, we now have to shift our program from condos to rentals, and guess what, you're not going to get paid back your initial investment in 5 years. Now you're going to have to stay into the long game. And if I'm an investor, and depending on what's on my horizon, I might be a little cautious about investing in that project or keeping my investment in that project, saying, no, I want out. Not everybody wants to be in the long game. They want to be able to move their money around. The issue with developers having land partners, land partners, a lot of these land partners, it's not a widely talked about topic in the developer community, but a lot of developers have land partners. What does that mean? That the developer themselves that is developing the project and appears to be the owner, quote unquote, is not really the owner of that land. There's a partnership with either an institution or another company, or even private individual might have owned a piece of land on Yonge Street for the last 50 years. It's been in their family, and now the best use for that land is to develop it, and they approach a big developer and say, hey, will you partner with us? Now that land partner has a huge say in the direction of that project. They may not want to be a long-term partner in that project. They brought land into the deal and they just want to get out. So it's going to be a little bit of stumbling blocks for a lot of developers that are not self-capitalized to be able to push these projects into rentals. At One Urban, we are self-capitalized, so we can make these decisions. We can shift and pivot with markets fluctuations. And that's helped us in the last 8 years of our company, where we've been able to shift from starting off as condo developers, and even prior to that being commercial and industrial developers, to now being purpose-built rental developers, because the people that we answer to ourselves are the owners, are the partners in this company. So it's an easier sell, provided that the numbers provided the numbers work. It's an easier sell to a group of smaller people who are all invested in the company, or all owners of that company. Much easier sell. I'm still going to touch on this developer topic and that part of your question, because I read an article just this past week that rental housing starts have actually slowed in the second half of 2024. Rental. So while there's been this huge push and this huge incentive to start all these rental housings, the problem is that the numbers still don't work in a lot of cases. There's been projects where Joe and I have looked at, and once you pencil it out at the bottom, it's like, wow, the land is practically free. I mean, nothing's free, but the land is practically free. The development charges are being reduced because of Bill 23, Bill 108. We've got so many incentives from the government, from CMHC, to make this work, and it still doesn't work. And
why does it still not work? Because
even with the interest rates where they are, even if you're getting a loan with CMHC at, if your program is, for argument's sakes, prime minus 50 basis points, which is still a really good rate today, the numbers don't work. The interest is too high. Joe and I looked at a project. I don't want to give you specific numbers, but it was creeping up to $500 million in development value.
Oh my goodness.
And I forgot what the interest on that project was. It was like 46 million in interest. Do I remember my numbers correctly on that one? It was like 46 million in interest. It doesn't make sense. The numbers don't work.
And you're committing too much to a debt that if something goes wrong, your exposure is significantly great. Your exposure is significantly great. So, case in point, we're currently working on a project, a purpose-built project. I don't want to share where it is yet and any of the details. It's a really big one, but for our own ability to maintain good financial posture through the entire project, we've had to consciously phase this project. Say, okay, it's going to be a 3-building project. We're going to have to phase this project to make sure that we don't expose ourselves so much that if something goes sideways, and it does on every project, we're not going to be able to recover. So to safeguard ourselves from that,
we're phasing out the project. And even still, it's not going to be 100% go ahead. We're still working the numbers. We're still working out the financial model on this project to see that if it actually works. So far, so good, but anything can change. I remember Mark Caruso, I believe he's with Treasure Hill now, CFO of Treasure Hill, but he used to be at CIBC. And I remember meeting him early on in my career when we were customers of the CIBC Bank. And I remember him telling me, in response to me saying that I was going to build a 4-story condo building, and I remember his response to me. He says, a lot can go sideways on a 4-story building. And at the time, I had not built a 4-story building, so I didn't understand exactly what he meant. But boy, did I once we start building that 4-story building, because a lot goes wrong on a 4-story building. A lot goes wrong on an 8-story, a 9-story, a 40-story. And the exposure is way, way too high. So us, on our end, we're being cautious.
Fair enough. Now,
But adding to what
Yes.
Nick is saying, we're still bullish for the rental market.
in
Even
regards
though
to
there's
what?
a bit of a lull right now,
oh, you feel that
we're
it
still
is-
bullish on the rental market. We feel that
You're
in the next
doubling
3 to
down on
4
it. We're all in.
years,
Yeah.
the next 3 or 4 years, the rental market will see an increase.
And with the incentives from the federal government, especially with the elimination of the HST self-supply on these buildings, which in a nutshell is our evaluation of what the HST payment is going to be at the end of a project, once that's removed, which it has been for purpose-built rental housing, up until 2035, that's a huge nut on a project. How much was it in Barrie? 11 million? In Oakville, it's something like 3.5, 4.
No, more than that.
Like,
Closer to $8 million.
oh, okay, I got my numbers wrong. I
Yeah.
stand corrected.
My goodness.
In Oakville, we are paying the HST self-supply because that legislation didn't pass until September of last year. So anything built or under construction prior
prior.
to September 15th, 2023 was still subject to the old rules. We were already in construction back in September of 2023. So we are still going to pay that HST self-supply on that project, which still makes it very, very difficult to make the numbers work, but they work. In Barrie, we were very lucky to be able to get that self-supply removed off the performa because of CMHC and the federal government rather coming in and saying we're going to remove the HST portion of the GST portion rather of the HST, and followed suit with the provinces that said that they were going to remove the PST. Right. That's huge. That's huge. And even still, with even that HST being removed, it's still a very difficult project to make work.
And the last topic of this episode, which I think brings everything full circle, and I want to play the Instagram, Facebook, YouTube followers that you have, and they've asked these simple-minded questions, which are very valid. Let me be their voice right now.
Please.
They said, it's great that you double-check, triple-check, and quadruple-check your budget sheet to make sure everything makes sense and your bottom end doesn't bottom you out. Okay, you'll always have that stability that you check your numbers, and if they work, then you push forward with the project. So far, so good?
We try our best to forecast.
Now.
But again, it is a forecast.
Now, what if, so you are the circus. Your purpose-built rentals is the tightrope walker. The economy is the rope. But you have a safety net down. So in the event anything happens, you have that safety net. You're
What's
not
the
going to
safety net?
The safety net is you looking at your financial spreadsheet and saying, we know our numbers, and if there's a little hiccup in the market, we're still good. That's my version of a safety net. Am I wrong?
I disagree with that.
Oh, but don't you have a safety net?
Well,
We have a safety net
yeah,
in the form of contingency.
that's one part of it. But we also use very conservative numbers.
Very conservative.
We try to be as conservative as possible when we're doing a forecast.
Towards the more worse part that could happen?
Always
Always.
to the more worst part. And, you can only go down that road too far until the performer doesn't work anymore.
Right.
And spoiler alert, usually by the end of the project, this performer doesn't work anymore, and you've massaged it so many times that now it's aching from your massage. So let me just address the safety net. The safety net is the contingencies and the conservative approach to our performa. However, A contingency is an expense. It's meant to be spent, and it will get spent. Contingency is there if you have changes, if you have unforeseen issues once you start going into the ground, once you start building a building. Oh, that pipe's not supposed to be there because there's a concrete shear wall. We're going to have to move that. That costs money. That costs redesign. Sure. Additional schedule extensions, that costs interest at the end of the project. That costs carrying
weather
costs,
events,
weather delays. Like we had 30 weather delays in Oakville. I think we ended up going through like over 60, and it's just par for the course. This happens. You will spend that safety net. The key is letting that safety net last till you get to the other end of your safety rope, or your tightrope rather.
Right.
Okay. Problem is, it doesn't always happen. Sometimes
But
the safety
it has
net.
to happen because you cannot allow the project to fall through the safety net. That cannot happen.
Then explain to me the number of insolvencies and projects this year that CMHC themselves have had to come in and save.
Yeah, but that's because they did not do their numbers correctly.
No,
they weren't
no,
conservative.
not necessarily.
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Most times, it's new developers that don't have the additional capital to inject in a project.
Or even seasoned developers that just had a bad construction project.
Yeah.
Like, I'm aware of a construction project. I'm not going to say where because there's liens and lawsuits on this. But I'm aware of a very big construction project in the GTA that went insolvent and is now being liened by every single trade on that project. And it's because of bad decisions that were made on the field. Sometimes that's not even the developer's fault. It could be the site team that made bad decisions. It could be the construction manager that they had that just didn't give a damn about the project because at the end of the day, it's not their money. That safety net can be removed really quickly.
So why does anyone
Oftentimes, why? Because no risk, no reward. This is the business that we're in. We talked about it this morning, Stefano, when you were setting up the cameras here in the room. We said, why do we live in this constant perpetual pain that we're in?
Right.
Why do we keep doing this? Because we like it. We
love pain.
There was a quote,
We just love it.
I went out with, I'm going to give a shout out to a good friend of mine, Joseph Dita at Iconic Metals. He is a personal friend, and he's also a very, very good partner of One Urban. We've worked with him for many projects now, and he's just a great contractor to work with. I went out to lunch with Joseph yesterday, and he said something that I thought was so true. He said, "There's no fun and easy.
Exactly.
There's no fun and easy. So if my job was easy, where all I did was came in the morning and I showed up at a certain time, and once I punched out at a certain time, and then that's it, my day's done, and I forget it. Okay, it's probably a lot more stable, but it's not fun. I'm a prisoner to the 9 to 5. What makes me any different from somebody that's at the Don jail? Is that thing even still around?
And
the Don
there's
jail?
Don jail? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so. It just goes to show you how many prisons I've been into.
And there's no stories to tell if you don't go through troubles and go through pain.
You'll have to go through other people's stories in order to tell stories.
Absolutely.
Guys, what if, God forbid, another COVID hits us all?
We're screwed. Especially if we're in the middle of construction, we're screwed. Province comes out and gives, we're screwed.
Finished?
Full stop.
Joe, do you believe
building through
agree?
COVID is extremely difficult.
I don't know. I have my own opinions about the whole thing.
Do you really?
I think this was an eye-opener for a lot of people. It opened our eyes
To what?
to many things.
To what?
To
how it can be manipulated?
Yeah.
Really?
How things can be manipulated, how lies can be told.
But it always comes back to what if we have a pandemic part 2?
I think people are a little bit smarter now, a little bit more cautious now, based on the first round. I think people are less eager to follow whatever the
narrative.
agenda or a narrative is.
I disagree. Is that crazy? I think we're all sheep. I really do. Because
some of us are more sheeper than others.
You cannot teach. What's that saying? You can't teach a horse to go drink water or something. What's that saying?
Yeah.
Basically, it's like, so for example, if a donkey, all he does is he goes up a hill, brings supplies, comes down a hill, and all of a sudden you want to teach him to roam like a sheep, or like a horse, he won't know what you're doing, because the blinders have been on so long.
I don't think you give people enough credit. I think people are a little bit more autonomous than that. I think people are free to make their own decisions. And based on what we've learned on the last round, I think people will be a little more cautious if the next go around happens.
You know what I like about what you're saying, Joe? How you're very optimistic, but the reality is we can all get together like a big group and fight the system until the system says, no, businesses are shut down, interest rates go through the roof again, you cannot work, which allows you to continue to make the economy grow. So if the government were to do what they just did again, everything, and I mean everything, is done. Because the chain of events, you saw what happened. Those mom and pops that were open for 100 years, shut down.
So in construction, where we saw the biggest challenges was supply chain. It became increasingly difficult to get material on site. Lead times were tripled and quadrupled from what they should normally be, and in some cases, distributors didn't even know when material was coming in. So you're now forecasting on events to happen that you don't even know. You don't even know when this stuff's going to come in. And then you had labor. Labor was a big issue. One person in a 10-man crew gets COVID. Guess what? That entire 10-man crew's got to stay home now for 2 weeks.
Exactly.
Because of the COVID rules. What does that do to the train of trades behind them? It derails it.
Derails the whole thing.
Completely. And then if that company doesn't have another crew to send in to replace the first crew, well, now you just lost 2 weeks. That's one crew. But, you know, at any given time, right now, we're at the finishing stages and we have 65 men on site every day, men and women, every day.
Imagine if all
So
of them...
imagine, well, not all of them, because it's not going to
but
happen
a
where
good
all of them are
portion.
getting sick at the same time. But if a good portion of them get sick, now you're delaying 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there. Our carrying costs are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars every month after our loan expires. And guess what? The bank, they don't care.
You better pay.
You got to pay. I don't care. There is no, there's force majeure and there's act of God clauses in our contracts, but it's in the favor of the banks, and as it should be, because they have such a huge risk in giving you $100 million plus to build a building that they want their money.
As long as people know that the fine print, underneath the fine print, is always going to be not in your favor.
The house always wins.
The house always wins. It's exactly Vegas. We live
The
a world of
house
Vegas.
always wins. And look, I got a lot of respect for the banks. They're what make our business roll. But they're going to do what they need to do to protect themselves, and rightfully so.
Pandemics aside,
Because they're
Oh,
going
sorry,
to
go ahead,
say,
finish. Yeah.
they're going to say, Mr. Developer, you wanted to do the business. You took that risk. You wanted the reward at the end of that risk. Pay up. We're just covering ourselves. And business is business.
Yeah.
And rightfully so.
Joe?
Pandemics aside, there are geopolitical pressures that affect certainty, things that are happening outside of our country that give uncertainty to how things are run in our country. So that definitely, I think, has a factor to play. Things that are going on in Israel, things that are going on in the Ukraine. It just adds that level of uncertainty. So we are in an uncertain market right now, given what's going around internationally and what's going on within our own country.
But there is one more certainty. One certainty I know for a fact will always happen. Groundbreakers will be back.
Groundbreakers will be back.
With that said, Nick, at your camera, tell everyone where they can find us.
You can find us at info@oneurban.ca, oneurban.ca across all social platforms. And with that, Groundbreakers out, where dreams are built and bricks get laid. Until next project.
See you next time.